The year is 660 AD. The air above the Wangsanbil plain is thick with the copper scent of blood and the dust of 10,000 marching boots. A lone rider detaches from the Silla lines, galloping toward the entrenched beach forces. He is not a weathered veteran. He is 16 years old. His armor is ornate, almost ceremonial, and beneath his helmet, his face is painted with white powder and rouge, giving him the appearance of a porcelain doll or a ghost. This is Quan Chang. He charges the enemy line alone. He is captured, released out of pity for his youth, and immediately drinks water from a well to cleanse his spirit before charging again. This time, he does not return. Hours later, a horse trots back to the Silla camp. There is no rider. Tied to the saddle, dripping onto the dry earth, is the severed head of the boy. General Pumel, the boy's father, does not weep. He steps forward, grasps his son's blood-matted hair, and wipes the face with his sleeve. He looks into the dead eyes of the 16-year-old and declares that his son's face is as it was when he was alive, that there is nothing to regret in dying for the king. This is not a tragedy to them. This is the apex of their existence. This is the Hwarang. To the modern Western mind, the Hwarang, or flower boys, present a jarring paradox. They were the elite youth of the Silla kingdom, celebrated for their exquisite beauty, their use of cosmetics, and their singing and dancing in the mountains. Yet, beneath the silk and the jade, they were a suicide cult dedicated to the state, conditioned to view death in battle as the only honorable conclusion to their lives. They were not merely soldiers, they were the desperate invention of a kingdom cornered on the southeastern tip of the Korean peninsula, struggling to survive against its larger, more aggressive neighbors. The story of the Hwarang does not begin with men, but with a failed experiment in female leadership and a murder buried in the mud of a northern river. In the early 6th century, the Silla monarchy, seeking to strengthen the state through spiritual and social cohesion, established the Wonhwa, or original flowers. These were bands of young women, led by two prominent female figures, Namo and Junjeon, chosen for their beauty and social standing. The court hoped that by organizing these women, they could foster loyalty and select the talented for service. It was a disaster. The rivalry between the two leaders, Namo and Junjeon, festered into a toxicity that would doom the organization. Consumed by jealousy, Junjeon invited Namo to her home, plying her with wine until she was intoxicated and vulnerable. In a cold, calculated act, Junjeon murdered her rival and buried the body in the silt of a riverbank. The crime went undiscovered until local children, taught a song by a mysterious figure who knew the truth, began singing of the murder in the streets. The body was exhumed, the treachery exposed, and Junjeon was executed. The Wonhwa were dissolved in disgrace. From the ashes of this failure, King Jinhung pivoted. If women could not anchor the spiritual defense of the realm, perhaps young men could. He issued a decree to select handsome boys from aristocratic families, adorning them with fine clothes, powdering their faces, and organizing them into the Hwarang. The requirement for physical beauty was not vanity, it was a spiritual technology. Influenced by shamanism and the Maitreya cult of Buddhism, the Silla court believed that a beautiful body housed a pure soul, and that by cultivating this aesthetic perfection, these boys could channel divine power to protect the state. They were believed to be incarnations of the Maitreya Buddha, descending to earth to guide Silla to a paradise of unification. But the reality of Silla society was far from a paradise. It was a rigid, suffocating hierarchy defined by the bone rank system. Your potential in life, the clothes you wore, the size of your house, the rank you could achieve in government was determined entirely by the bone you were born into. At the top were the sacred bones, the pure royals eligible for the throne. Below them were the true bones, the high aristocracy. Below them, the head ranks, 6 through 1. If you were head rank 6, no matter your genius or your bravery, you would never rise above a certain level of command. This caste system created a pressure cooker of ambition and resentment among the youth. The Hwarang became a mechanism to harness that energy, binding the sons of the true bones and the elite into a fraternity of absolute loyalty. The training of a Hwarang was a synthesis of the sacred and the profane. They retreated to deep mountain valleys and rugged coastlines, engaging in the Pung Yudo, the way of wind and moon. To an outsider, it might have looked like a retreat for artists. They sang songs, drank tea, and appreciated nature. But in the shadows of those mountains, they were hardening themselves for slaughter. They studied the 5 secular injunctions laid down by the monk Wen Guang, a code that stripped away the Buddhist prohibition against killing and replaced it with a chilling pragmatism. Kill only with selective reasoning was the command. It reconciled the pacifism of their religion with the necessity of state violence. They were taught never to retreat in battle. They were conditioned to believe that their swords were extensions of their souls, instruments of a divine will that demanded blood for the survival of the kingdom. One of the most illustrious products of this system was Sadaham. At 15, an age where modern boys are barely navigating adolescence, Sadaham was already a Hwarang leader with a following of 1,000 men. In 562 AD, Silla launched a campaign against the Gaya Confederacy. Sadaham, despite his youth, begged to lead the vanguard. He did not command from the rear. He led his band of followers directly at the gate of Kandaliang fortress, breaching the defenses in a suicidal charge that shattered the enemy's morale. He was the first to break through, turning the tide of the war. When the king offered him rewards of land and captives, Sadaham refused. He liberated 300 war slaves, refusing to profit from the misery of the defeated. But the darkness of the Hwarang ethos revealed itself shortly after his triumph. Sadaham had sworn a pact of friendship with another Hwarang, Mugwan Nang, a vow that if one died, the other would not survive him. When Mugwan died of illness, Sadaham did not simply mourn. He starved himself. For 7 days, he refused food and sleep, his body withering in a performance of loyalty that mirrored the extreme discipline of the battlefield. He died on the 7th day, a victim not of war, but of the crushing weight of the Hwarang Code. The unification of the Korean peninsula was forged by such men, but the architect of Silla's ultimate victory was Kim Il-sung. His life reads less like a military biography and more like a mythic descent into the supernatural. At 15, he was a Hwarang. At 17, possessed by a burning desire to destroy the rival kingdoms of Goguryeo and Beach, he entered a grotto on Mount Chung'ake. He stayed there, alone, amidst poisonous snakes and tigers, fasting and praying for power. Legend dictates that a mysterious old man appeared, testing the boy's resolve before granting him secret methods of warfare. Later, on Mount Inbak, Kim Il-sung prayed for his sword to be imbued with spirit. It is said that the constellations shone their light into the steel until the blade quivered with a life of its own. This sword was not a symbol, it was a tool of execution. Years later, when a Chinese general insulted a Silla commander, Kim Il-sung's sword reportedly leapt from its scabbard into his hand of its own accord, ready to decapitate the ally who dared disrespect his nation. Kim Il-sung's brutality was absolute. In a battle against Beach, when morale was breaking, he did not deliver a rousing speech. He rode alone into the enemy ranks, tackled the opposing general, and severed his head. He returned to his lines, holding the dripping trophy aloft, igniting a blood frenzy in his troops that led to the slaughter of 5,000 enemies. On another occasion, seeing a bird flying ominously over his camp, a bad omen that terrified his superstitious Chinese allies, he simply sliced the bird in half mid-flight, stating that a small creature could not interfere with his great expedition. He was a man who bent the world, natural and supernatural, to his will through sheer violence. The efficiency of the Hwarang was terrifying. They painted their faces white, decorated their ears with jade, and rode into the mud and gore of 7th century warfare with a serenity that unsettled their enemies. The Tang Chinese, who allied with Silla to destroy Beach and Goguryeo, looked upon these flower boys with a mixture of fascination and horror. They saw the powder and the silk, but they also saw the suicidal charges. They saw boys like Quan Chang, sent by their own fathers to die to prove a point about loyalty. When the dust settled in 676 AD, Silla stood as the victor, having unified the peninsula and driven out even their Chinese allies. The Hwarang had served their purpose. The desperate need for a caste of suicidal warrior mystics faded as the stability of the unified Silla period took hold. The organization slowly demilitarized, their songs and dances becoming less about preparing for death and more about ritual and art. By the time of the Joseon dynasty, centuries later, the term Hwarang had devolved, associated with shamans, traveling entertainers, and sometimes male prostitutes, a shadow of the iron-willed elite that had forged a nation. However, the specter of the Hwarang did not stay buried. In the 20th century, as South Korea emerged from the trauma of Japanese colonization and the Korean War, military dictators like Park Chung-hee resurrected the Hwarang myth. They needed a narrative of absolute loyalty, of martial sacrifice, of a pure Korean military tradition to legitimize their rule. They stripped away the nuance, the shamanism, and the ambiguity, polishing the Hwarang into a monolithic symbol of patriotism. The Hwarang spirit became a tool for modern indoctrination, the ancient flower boys repurposed to demand obedience from a new generation of soldiers. History, however, remembers the cold reality behind the myth. It remembers the makeup smeared with sweat and blood. It remembers the suicide pacts and the severed heads. It remembers that the unification of a peninsula was bought by the weaponized fanaticism of teenage boys, who were taught that to fade away in old age was a failure, and to die young, beautiful, and violent was the only way to truly live.